Slavery should not be legal. It says in the U.S. Constitution that all men are created equal. The American government was founded on the revolution against oppressors. Therefore, we are becoming the nation that we lost so many lives to. John Jay stated that men should pray and fight for their own freedom, and yet keeping others in slavery is certainly acting very inconsistent, as well as unjust and perhaps impious. Slaves were taking jobs from Caucasians. It did not actually help the South's economy because the majority of the South was large plantation owners. Small farmers owned one or two slaves but worked next to each other and were bonded on large plantations. There were skilled slaves who would craft windows, houses, and furniture, who were often rented out to other plantation owners, making white people who were skilled in crafting not want to go into jobs because they were considered slave jobs. If slavery was abolished, then we would have a middle class, which then would better the economy and enrich the South. Slaves were captured and taken away from their families in Africa, just to go on a ship where they were starved, beaten, and were packed together, where they could not even get up to use a bathroom or stretch their limbs. The conditions were so horrific that many slaves often committed suicide because they could not handle it. As slaves died off, their bodies were disposed of by getting thrown off the edge of the ship. When they got to America, they were sold in slave auctions like they were cattle. Many tried running away from their masters because they were so miserable, risking getting their toes and fingers cut off or being attacked by dogs. The masters would actually teach the dogs to enjoy the taste of blood by making them attack the working slaves, whether they are obeying orders or not. Therefore, slavery should be illegal because the conditions they were forced to live in were immoral and dehumanizing.
Slavery should stay legalized because it has existed throughout history. It was the natural state of mankind. Without slavery, the pyramids would not have gotten built, nor the Colosseum. They were an important part of the creation of architecture. Sudden end to the slave economy would have had a profound and killing economic impact in the South, where reliance on slave labor was the foundation of their economy. If all slaves were freed, then there would be widespread unemployment and chaos. There was already not enough jobs for the Irish immigrants who were coming to America after the devastation of the crop fields in Ireland. Furthermore, the Fifth Amendment states that citizens have the right to life, liberty, and property. Slaves were not considered humans but property by the Supreme Court in the 1850s by Dred Scott decision. In the Bible, David, of David and Goliath, and Abraham both owned slaves, therefore it was okay to own slaves, even if you were a Christian. The institution was divine, and that it brought Christianity to the heathen from across the ocean. Slavery was a good thing for the enslaved. John C. Calhoun said, "Never before has a black race of Central America, Africa, from the dawn of history to the present day, attained a condition so civilized and so improved, not only physically, but morally and intellectually. If we did not have slave labor, then we would not have been able to start our country."
You stated that slave labor was a major part of the Constitution of our country. However, I would like to point out that our country had already been significantly started in its creation before we had begun starting to import slaves. Also, with the statement about slaves not being able to fend for themselves, if they were to be set free, they would not be exposed to this sort of inconvenience if we hadn't exposed them to slavery in the first place.
Objection.
And do you feel it was also necessary to risk so many human being lives just to build the Colosseum and the pyramids? In addition, the Colosseum was built for odd entertainment, the killings of even more men. We had abused African American people to build a place in which kills even more people. You stated that slavery was accepted even as Christians. However, the Bible also states in Galatians 1:16, "For in him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth. Therefore, slaves should not be treated as if they are any less important than God himself."
In your opening statement, you said that slaves were captured and taken away from their families. This is not actually factual information. In fact, rival tribes would capture their enemies and sell them to us. We did not capture them ourselves. Portugal and Spain had been bargaining with Africa for slaves long before we became a nation. Slave owners would provide housing for individual families to keep them together as much as they could. Slaves did not always come across the Atlantic with their families because rival tribes would often split them up and sell the stronger ones. However, when they did, buyers would try to keep them together for as long as they could. It was encouraged to start families and reproduce. Women were even given breaks to nurse their children. House slaves not only took care of their owners' children, but made sure the African American children had someone to watch after them while their mothers were out tending to the fields. Keeping slave carcasses on the ships on their journey to the Americas would make other slaves sick, so by throwing them overboard it was actually beneficial to the remaining slaves. Also, in the disposal of the deceased slaves, it was not disrespectful but traditional. Likewise, in the Norse culture, they would set up a ceremony to place the deceased on a lit raft to send them into open seas.
In conclusion, owning slaves is immoral, and if we abolish slavery now, then our future will be less filled with segregation and racism. Abraham Lincoln once stated, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. I will become all one thing or all the other. Therefore, we must abolish slavery if we ever want to be truly united.
Furthermore, Thomas Jefferson and many other founding fathers, the men who created our country, owned slaves. It is even said that Jefferson had an illegitimate child with one of his slaves. Slavery should remain legal because it's economically helpful and beneficial for everyone.